Senator Menendez.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a few other questions. Secretary Billingsley, let me ask you, expectations, I think, among the Senate was that you would continue to impose sanctions on oligarchs, but clearly you've decided to diminish pressure. You haven't designated any oligarchs since April 6. You have delisted Estonian banks. Now that there are reports that you may delist Rusal, what kind of signal does that send to the Kremlin? We're told to judge the administration by its actions and not by the president's words, but these actions seem to be more aligned with an accommodating and disturbing rhetoric that the president has versus a tougher approach.
Senator, I'm unaware of any intention to, quote-unquote, delist Rusal. If anything, we're pushing forward to see Deripaska completely removed from any ownership or control of both Rusal and EN Plus as a way forward. We are far from easing up. We're continuing to accelerate. If we just look at the cyber sanctions, we've sanctioned.
Let me interrupt you for a moment.
Yes,
I want to focus specifically on oligarchs.
on the oligarchs.
And in that respect, unless I'm wrong, there has been no designation since April 6. And you have delisted Estonian banks. I'm glad to hear you're not delisting Rusal, at least not intending to. But one of the elements, you don't become an oligarch in Russia unless Putin makes you one, right? So at the end of the day, this is his satellite universe of people who support him and maybe even part of his monies at the end of the day. So I hope you'll create a greater focus on that, because that's, I think, critical towards our goals here. Let me also ask you, while I'm directing questions to you, the Obama administration imposed sanctions on the FSB and GRU following the 2016 election. How many of those officers' accounts have been frozen? Do you know?
On the GRU officers, I don't have that information in hand.
Could you get FSB officers as well?
Yes, sir.
And how much money did those individuals lose as a result of any sanctions, if there are any, as it relates to them?
I'll have to take that for the record,
okay.
sir.
Now, Secretary Mitchell, let me, I have a high regard for you, but it gets a little diminished when you do things that I think are political in nature. You mentioned the mighty river comment as it relates to the previous administration. Well, that was 2009. That was before Crimea. That was before the invasion. That was before the Obama administration levied sanctions against Russia for its invasion of Crimea. That was before when the president ultimately went ahead, and that's why Russia is not part of the G7 today. It's also when it became aware that Russia was interfering with our elections, that it did pursue sanctions against the GRU and the FSB. And that's why it made a commitment reaffirming NATO's commitment to extend membership to Georgia. And I could go through a long list. So I'm not sure that that type of comparison that you attempted to make is in our collective interests at the end of the day. But I do want to ask you, the president at the Helsinki press conference announced the establishment of a high-level working group to include business and economic leaders from Russia and the United States. I thought it was our policy to put economic pressure on the Kremlin to stop attacking our elections, its illegal occupation of Ukraine, its war crimes in Syria. Why are we promoting business ties with a regime that we are actually trying to severely sanction?
Of the things that you've said, Senator.
Well, I only have one question, so
okay, I'll respond to the second thing.
I have limited time, so you can respond to my question.
Look, I think Helsinki, what came out of Helsinki, other than an agreement for the two National Security Councils to meet, was to explore the concept of two things: a business council of some kind, details to be determined, and an academic exchange, a track to Dartmouth type thing like we did during the Cold War. We're assessing right now what, if anything, would be the composition or way forward on either of these?
Well, it just seems counterintuitive that we're trying to affect the Russian economy and then we're trying to create business ties. Let me ask you this. Increasingly, Russia provides a vital source for oil and aviation fuel to North Korea. And there have been reports that at times when China has slowed its exports, Russia has stepped up to fill the breach. So whether it's part of a broader strategy to increase Russian influence in Asia, or merely an effect to make mischief and complicate our efforts to deal with and constrain Pyongyang, it's clear that Moscow intends to play a role in North Korea and not one that's helpful. What are your thoughts in this regard on how we best deal with that?
I agree with that characterization. Russia is not being helpful in many regards with North Korea. Look, I mean, on one hand, they're part of the United Nations Security Council consensus that's critical for maximum pressure. On the other hand, they appear to be working against many of the measures that they themselves have supported in the National Security Council. What I would say is on an ongoing basis, we're looking very carefully, whether it's Russian behavior on DPRK, Syria, across the board, we're looking on an ongoing basis at all of these things and the authorities at our disposal for responding to it.
And finally, Mr. Billingsley, congratulations. I just got notification that you have been nominated to be the Undersecretary for Civilian Security, Democracy, and Human Rights. I look forward to our conversation as it relates to that potential new role. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.